Chapter 1.10, Part 4. So we're still on feminist analysis and critique, and we are looking at the Odalisque. And remember, this is the kind of work that feminists were really critical of in terms of the objectification of the woman and idealization of the woman. She's kind of got extra vertebrae, or she's not drawn quite correctly, but that was sort of the fashion or the predilection of the artist. Particularly liked women's long, backs, so that's how he portrayed her. So this is the objectification. She's making eye contact with us, so that's a little bit, interesting here, but it's much more of intriguing or inviting kind of a look. And one of the things our author points out at the bottom of page 179 is that during this time in France, where this was painted, women were demanding equal rights, and the statement here, it says, this is causing men to pine for docile females. And we've seen this over time. There's sort of a retroism, or there's a shift in terms of pursuing types of women that perhaps are perceived as more docile or feminine over time when there was a feminist backlash. So the feminists are looking at this as a not quite pornographic, but definitely something like a pinup or eye candy in the past from 1814, and they're criticizing him in terms of being idealistic female form, objectification, of the female form. So it's a nude woman in a harem. It's a place, by the way, a man would never be. So it's kind of giving him this glimpse into this place. So we have some other historical pieces here. This is our Venus of Urbino from Titian in the Renaissance, 1538. And that, caused a bit of a stir during its time. But Venus, remember, we're portraying a goddess here, similar to Botticelli's Venus, which happened, was it? Previous to this, about 100 years prior to this piece. Or is it that long? Anyway, she's here as a goddess. There's a maidservant in the other room. There's a little dog there. But she's got, some fruit, and she's looking longingly at the potential lover or the person coming in there. So that's sort of the precursor to this image. Then we have Ingres de version, and then we have Manet. Now this alone was quite scandalous in the sense that she was a known prostitute, and the flowers have come up as a delivery for her services. She's much more confrontational and less loving in her gaze. There are a lot of comments at the time when this was out in public that her fingernails were dirty. She looked a little dirty and low class, and how dare we have a naked woman that is dirty and low class, let alone confronting the viewer as opposed to enticing it. She's challenging the male gaze. She's being confrontational and honest, really, about her profession. And then down here we have another piece, and I don't have this handy for the title. Let me go back out of the screen. Yasumasa Morimura's portrait, and that's more recent, 1988 to 1990, and he's going a step further in that he's put both of the figures as himself. He's closer to Manet than the others, but he's put himself in both of these figures. That's him, and it's photoshopped. But he's putting himself in the role of the feminine, so it's tweaking it even further. And then he's even changing his race here. So he's challenging some racial identities and also gender identity by becoming the woman reclining on the couch. Okay, so then we're going to get into gender studies proper, and we're going to think about some of the expansion of feminist analysis in terms of how we're looking at work. What happened it started in the 70s, but I would say it kind of blew up more in the 1990s, is we were starting to really question the old colonial, if you will, way of looking at art, the European view of analysis and criticism. And even before that, we get into Freud in the 1920s. He starts to get into psychoanalysis, and that's where a lot of these different interpretations really stem from. It kind of goes back to that, but we'll get into the psychological analysis in a moment. But as time went on in the 20th century, the idea that there was one way to look at something really started to break apart. Okay, so we're going to start to look at, we're going to look at Robert Mapplethorpe's self-portrait. And he was he was such an iconoclast. He really was, I would say we sort of would embrace his work now, but at the time, this is from 1980, so late 70s is when he was active. He was friends with Patti Smith, the singer, who is still around today, punk rock singer, poet. And Mapplethorpe was really into the idea of the bending the perception of gender. So his face is made up really in the style of the 80s makeup. That sort of look right there is very 80s. Lipstick, the whole thing. And confronting you and really giving you a believability of a woman's face, but then he exposes the torso and you can see very clear that he's male. So he's asking you to question your perceptions here. His other photos are of really stunning black and white flowers. He also does some of a male torso, and some of them get into bondage, and some kind of intense, I would say, sexual, mostly homoerotic sort of pieces with him and another man, or with two guys, or something like that. But the thing is, he's using this gelatin silver print, which is the same kind of thing that Ansel Adams would have used, 60 years earlier. And it's beautiful and rich and form, and it really gives us a sense of value shift, and really, you can feel the softness of the flesh, really, looking at it, and the hair and the whole thing. So his idea was to sort of tell his story about his world, but in this way that you can appreciate the beauty of it. And that's another thing outside of gender analysis, which I won't get too far into, but the idea that something is beautiful no matter what the subject matter is. It's not really about the subject matter so much. But in his case, this piece particularly was a self-portrait. He was criticized a lot because he took a government, the NEA grant, back in the 80s, and he had taken these photos and then exhibited them with public money, and that is where a whole firestorm started off. And a lot of the Christian right, really, Jesse Helms, I think in particular, was a senator at that time, really was very upset about these images. So it changed the way that NEA grants were given to some degree, but it also broke through, on the other side of it also broke through sort of what imagery we would see in a museum. It really did change that. So elegantly lit, beautifully composed. They're doing all the formal aspects of photography that make something really rich and beautiful, printed in that gelatin silver.